And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our platform where we are rapidly disposing of rhinos in the state legislature, advancing the cause of constitutional conservatism in Louisiana, and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today. We will be continuing the endorsement series. And just a reminder to you all, please stay engaged on these, even if the candidates are not in your district, because as we've mentioned before, they stand to change the landscape of the legislature. And we would just love for you to share these episodes with your friends and family members who do live in those areas so we can lend extra support to solid conservative candidates. And just a reminder that we have short clips on YouTube and Rumble that make it easy to share to get people interested in these candidates if they can't commit to listening to a full episode. So, with that said, today we will be talking to a woman who is a bright light, a believer, and a true principled conservative, Representative Dodie Horton. She's running for re-election as state rep in District 9. But before we talk to Dodie, let me read the scripture of the day. Today is Psalm chapter 94, verses 20 to 23, and it says, "It's obvious to all you will have nothing to do with corrupt rulers who pass laws that empower evil and defeat what is right. For they gang up against the lovers of righteousness and condemn the innocent to death. But I know that all their evil plans will boomerang back onto them. Every plot they hatch will simply seal their own doom. For you, my God, you will destroy them, giving them what they deserve. For you are my true tower of strength, my safe place, my hideout, and my true shelter." And I have to say, the Lord has been stirring in me all week the theme of justice. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I don't believe that we're living in a time where justice is reserved only for eternity. I believe that we are going to see it and that we will experience it. The Lord sees the hearts and the actions of all people, and He hears our cries and our prayers for righteousness and justice to be reestablished on the earth. And I believe that He is moving to do just that. I believe He wants us to participate by making sure that the truth gets louder than the lies. And I truly, truly believe that we are about to see a move of justice sweep across this state, across this nation, and across this world in a way that has never been experienced before.
Danielle, that is powerful psalm. We are, in fact, the instruments of God's justice on earth. And, the Our Father, the prayer that Jesus, the only prayer that Jesus specifically instructed us to pray was the Our Father. And part of that prayer is, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, which tells me that we are, in fact, his instruments of justice on earth. And we should not have a posture of simply waiting and cowering and suffering through this life in the hope of eternal refuge and eternal reward. No, we have a battle to fight right now, and we are his instruments on earth to bring his kingdom to pass right here on earth. And someone who has done that and continues to do that since 2015, since she was first elected to the state legislature, is Representative Dodie Horton. I mean, she has stood with us and her constituents on every issue that matters to us, from taxes to supporting our veterans, our teachers, opposing the agenda of the radical left, protecting small businesses, protecting the unborn, protecting the Second Amendment. It is a stellar track record of fidelity to her constituents and to the citizens of the state of Louisiana. And it's such a privilege to have her on with us this morning. Representative Dodie Horton, how are you?
I'm doing great, and it's such a blessing to be here with you. And I thank you for your kind words and your constant encouragement and support. You're invaluable to those of us who stand and want to glorify God by the way we serve. And because you are there at the Capitol almost every day, you're in the fight, you're in the trenches, you're getting us support from the public, because we know when we, the people, get involved mountains can actually move. The legislation we were able to pass this year that got to the governor's desk only happened because of people like you being engaged and inspiring others to be engaged as well. Because we're all in this together, and we must all do our part if we really want to fight the leftist agenda that is moving swiftly through this country.
We are indeed all in it together.
Yes, and Dodie, I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, Chris and Katie have been down at the legislature just as champions for what's right and as champions for we the people. And I really love that, just hearing from you, that they've been such an encouragement to you and your colleagues who are standing up there doing what's right. Dodie, tell us a little bit about your background before you ran for public office. What were you up to, and then what led you into public service to start with?
Well, my father was a Shreveport police officer, a Marine in Korea, and prior, and my mother, she was an educator and raising 6 children. And we were always taught to, when the pledge came on TV, no matter where we were, my father would stand up and we would as well. You know, he taught us what being a true servant of the people was, as he was, and how important it was to defend our country and to honor all the veterans who kept us free and living in this free society. So I was always mindful of that, and of course, and they were always politically minded. It was always on the TV, trying to keep up with what was going on in the country. So that was always like a mindset for me. I was always listening. And then, marrying my hero, Dodie Horton, who's a retired Shreveport firefighter, and moving to Houghton, Louisiana, for 47 years ago. This is home. I love the people, and it's just a wonderful place to live. And I was I was a orthodontic assistant for many, many years. I love working in orthodontics. And then there was a time when a lot of good friends of mine, when our children were growing up, in order to be home with them more, we started to drive a school bus for Bossier Parish School Board. So for 10 years I did that, and I was able to drive them to their activities and be off and able to participate in everything they were doing. And then after about 10 years, I went back into private work in the orthodontic field until Representative Henry Burns, my predecessor, decided to run for office. And so he is one of the best people you want to know, a retired military and an educator. He has a major in education and a small business owner. He was in oil and gas. And when he won by 87 votes, he asked me to be his legislative assistant. And so together, we learned the process. Together, we decided this was going to be a ministry of service. We wanted to honor God by the way we took care of constituent needs. That was my job. My duty was to take care of our constituents and on his behalf. That's what this is about. We are the liaison between the state agencies and the citizens that we serve. And we are here to stand in the gap for them. Number one priority for this office is continuing that ministry of service. And that is priority to us, to take care of the needs of the people here at home. And so, when after serving with Representative Burns 8 years, he decided to run for the Senate. Then, I was asked to step into this position and was elected overwhelmingly, and then went unopposed last term. And even though the good old boys have been trying to get someone to run against me for years, they did finally find someone. But that is kind of how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dodie. First of all, what struck me is, well, every time our guest tells us that they have a family member, particularly their dad, who was a U.S. Marine, it endears me to our guest even more because my dad was a U.S. Marine during Korea,
Oh, wow.
also, and had many of the lessons and values that he taught me and my 11 brothers and sisters growing up.
11.
He learned, he learned in the U.S. in the U.S. Marines, and so I have a real fidelity. I'm still waiting for my aunt. We were raised like Marines, and I've been going to the mail every day for 40 years, waiting for my honorary commission to the U.S. Marine Corps. It hasn't arrived yet, Dodie, but I'm still hopeful that one day it will get there. And let me ask you this: one of the issues that has been very concerning for our listeners and I think citizens across Louisiana, that's at the top of the agenda now, is a possible second effort to lock us down based upon a new COVID strain and possibly some new emergency protocols that would no doubt once again strip us of some, if not all, of our freedom. I ask you this question because I know that you in 2020 stood strong with Representative Seabaugh and a number of other conservative legislators in opposing Governor Edwards' draconian emergency lockdown. Talk to the listeners about that experience briefly in 2020, why that was so important to try to get that done, and also what you are prepared to do in the event that they try to lower the boom on us again.
That was such a foreign event. I think we were in shock. We knew that we had taken our freedom for granted every day up until then when it was challenged. And I believe that going through that time, when we lost our freedom, we lost a lot of our medical liberty to choose what type of medical shots or treatment or procedures that we would get. Government became all things to all people at that time. And I, for one, refuse to ever comply. I ever comply again. I believe that we are good soldiers, and the public, being fearful of this foreign Chinese virus that came into our country, designed just to wreak havoc on our citizens. But I believe mainly it was a government tool of control to see just how compliant we would become, how much of the data or the lies that were being spread about COVID would we continue to believe and follow. And once our eyes began to open, and we really saw what was going on as far as the government push for, again, the vaccines untested. I really don't call it a vaccine because vaccines that we take are effective, and they prevent polio and so many smallpox and so many other diseases. But this was, I think, a shot in obedience. It was a shot in control, and many of our constituents lost their jobs or they were ostracized. We had medical physicians that would constantly be in touch with me, in constant touch with me, and was telling me exactly how harmful that shot was, that they are opposed to it. And several of these medical doctors were reported by their colleagues, and the medical examiners board, they really started to come down hard on them. And so it was a very hard time, but when you stand on God's truth and our constitutional principles, you know and you see immediately that this was wrong. I honestly believe at first it was, meant possibly by the administration to try to save lives. But as it kept going on and on and on, knowing what the protocol was, knowing that a lot of small businesses could control their environment, and knowing that our churches are free from government control, from government intrusion, and seeing that they even had their finger on our freedom of worship, it just became totally intolerable. We were sending well children home for the first time in my lifetime. And our school boards, and and again, businesses were fearful. They didn't want to be closed down. They didn't want to be, they were afraid if they didn't follow protocol and someone got sick and died, that they would be responsible. So it was just, everybody was feeling so many different levels of fear that was constantly being thrown out there from government, and so it was a very difficult time. But as my constituents began to wake up and to exactly what was going on, they demanded to be released from the government control, from the thumb that the Edwards administration kept on us, far past what they felt that he should do. That's when we had to stand up and begin to push back and push back and push back because of we the people and the outcry, and because they were going to lose their jobs. Many lost their businesses, their homes, their careers. They had to move to other states that were to Texas to Florida, that were free to continue to live their lives according to their own resolve and their and that where their personal liberties were protected, not infringed upon, we knew we had to take action. We had to stand against this oppression, and stand we did. And so I do not believe that our citizens as a whole will ever go back into the. They will not readily submit or give up their freedoms and say, "Here, we are yours. You control us. You are our master." And to follow like blind sheep. I don't believe you'll ever see that again. I don't.
I hope not. I certainly hope not, and I won't be complying. I know Chris won't be either. It, Dodie, is there? er, I know that the legislative remedy was met with plenty of resistance. What did you maybe learn from that process, and is there a different approach that can be taken? Or, I mean, I think at least we'll hopefully have a whole different slate of leaders in place. So maybe get some of these rhinos out that were so recalcitrant to doing the will of the people.
You know, it was mind boggling to me how people thought they could benefit from being on administration's, I don't know what to say, team, or how they felt they could personally benefit by continuing to support the lockdown when they knew themselves they weren't following the protocol. They knew themselves that we were in the legislature. We weren't forced to be masked. We were there at our desk. We were meeting, and sitting as close as I have always been in committee. And how could I expect people here to comply to something that we were not complying to?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. There was even inconsistency in the enforcement of the unnecessary emergency protocol, and it's just it's unfortunate and it's sad precisely because of all of the suffering that occurred in Louisiana citizens. I can remember Dodie looking and reviewing the World Health Organization report on COVID. This was a week or two after the pandemic broke out and nobody was certain about what was going to happen or what was going to do. And the World Health Organization at that time said and admitted that 99.95 whatever percent of the American population was not threatened by COVID. If you were healthy and you had a good immune system, then you didn't have anything to worry about. It was certainly not fatal. And yet, our governor proceeds to lock down healthy citizens across the state of Louisiana. The first time, to my knowledge, that any pandemic has been responded to in that way. Normally, you obviously quarantine and isolate those who are vulnerable, either because they're elderly or have comorbidities, and you take care of those folks. But locking down millions of healthy citizens across the state, I thought was just an entirely damaging and inappropriate way to respond to that pandemic. And I'm very, very happy and gratified that you and a number of other conservatives, included Representative Alan Seabaugh, stood up strong against it. And as Danielle said, because of a number of rhinos in the legislature, you were unable to get quite the number of petitions necessary to revoke that emergency protocol. But you certainly get an A for effort. You did everything that you could possibly do on that. I want to switch gears for just a second here, Dodie, because I was there this past session. Danielle was there some of the time. Katie was there some of the time. And I wanted to talk about a couple of very important bills that you spearheaded and authored during the 2023 session. One was House Bill 8, which I love this legislation. It requires the posting in public schools in Louisiana above every classroom or prominent throughout the school, the motto, "In God We Trust." And what an important reminder to Louisiana citizens about the genesis of our country, the foundational principles of our country, the way that our founding fathers reflected on and relied upon divine providence. Why was that legislation so important that you successfully passed this past session?
With I guess the left's agenda going after our children, they are after the hearts and mind of our children. They want to rob them of their innocence, and want to normalize certain lifestyles that are not to be, but are not widely accepted, that they're less than 1% of the population. And they want to do this with separating parental rights and what happens at school. They want to come between the parent and the child, but they're faced with all these things for social media. Suicide and mental illness is at an all-time high, peer pressure, bullying, the things they face at home we do not even know. It's such an uncertainty in their world. And so I thought it was so important that they understand that our country was founded on a supreme being. And our motto reflects the heart of a country. It says who we are. And when you have that motto and they look up there and see that, that is a positive message. And I pray that they'll see that and know that tomorrow will be a better day, that we serve a God and God is in control, and He is there for you. And I wanted to get God back in the classroom in a way that is not what has been. I guess some people think it's against our Constitution, because our national motto has been tried and tested, and the Supreme Court always rules in favor of that motto, and so it was just a no-brainer to me. But my motivation was for, on behalf of our children, to have something positive to look at and to reflect on every day, and to give the educator a way to talk about the history of it. Also use it as a history lesson. And so,
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And as Danielle and I have discussed before on it, who knows? Maybe there's a child in school, a student in public school in Louisiana who's never really had any exposure to God. Maybe has never thought much about divine providence or a higher power, and maybe simply just reading that "In God We Trust" maybe on some level facilitates the beginning of a relationship with God. You never know what seed could be planted in the hearts and minds of these students just by that posting in the public school. So this is not just some symbolic gesture, Dodie. This is something that could have a real consequence and significance in the lives of students across the state.
I pray so, because it is the message is what we want to reflect upon. And it's when I was growing up, I go to school, we'd say a prayer and the pledge. I knew there was a God, and I knew that we needed to honor our country. And and when one person was able to go and to petition to take prayer out of school, I remember we were complacent. We all that thought that would never happen. Not in our, no one would ever take God out of our state, out of our country in any way, but it happened.
Due to and it happened, Dodie, and it happened, not to interject, but it happened due to a gross distortion of the doctrine of the separation of church and state, the gross distortion of Thomas Jefferson's statement about the wall between church and state, which was never intended to keep religion out of the public square or to keep religion or God out of schools. It was intended to keep the state from imposing a particular religion or a particular denomination on citizens. So it was a bulwark of protection of the citizens against the state, not the other way around. So you're so right. You're so right. It was such a distortion, and there's absolutely nothing unconstitutional about your bill. In God we trust. It's so important. One other one that I want to mention to you, because this is very important, and I think this is one of the most important pieces of social legislation of the whole session. Your House Bill 466, which we were down there and you fought so hard on and defended so well. And by the way, this wasn't the first time that you had brought this. This was the second or third time that you had brought it. Rhinos had succeeded in killing it before, but not this time. This legislation that simply prohibits administrators and teachers and school personnel from broaching what are clearly inappropriate sexual topics with their students. And those topics should be handled by parents and by counselors. And your bill would have strictly prohibited that in the public schools, a much needed piece of legislation. Talk about that and why that was important.
I thank you so much, for Chris, for being there and supporting me in this bill and this legislation every step of the way, and standing in the gap to protect our children. This was the second year to bring it, and it was a much better bill than it was the first year. And so what really helped is when there was a transgender couple from several cities in our state, and also others that live a different lifestyle, that consulted with me, and I consulted with them on the language of this bill, because just like they feel, no one, absolutely no one, has a right to discuss topics with my children or to indoctrinate them according to their values and their beliefs, instead of the parents instilling the beliefs and the doctrine that they live by. And they too wanted their children protected, and not, and so this is not about someone's lifestyle choice. The narrative that the media continues to perpetuate, the lies about this bill, is what I believe a lot of people were reacting to, but they were not responding to the content of the actual bill. And so it was important because the movement, and like we talked about, the transgender movement that is sweeping the really leftist agenda, sweeping our country, and to infiltrate our children, and to rob them of their innocence. And when you have when there's no line in the sand that a teacher cannot cross, and or they could go in and rob the children of their innocence by coming out to the classroom and say, I may be Miss So and so today, but tomorrow I'm going to be known as Mr. So and so. Can you imagine the confusion of the children? And teachers too are very, very influential over the children, and our kids want to be liked. They want to be the teacher's pet, and so the influence that educators have is tremendous. And now let me just say, in Bossier Parish, I don't know of an educator who ever has that in their heart to do. They want to go, they love our kids, they want to teach them according to the state standard and the developed curriculum according to those standards that each school board, initiates. Right now, our parents can go online, they can see exactly what the curriculum is for each grade, the list of books the teachers can choose from. It's all transparent.
The teachers in your district also don't want to be pressured by radical leftist organizations to impose these doctrines on their students. And this legislation would have protected them from that and taken a lot of pressure off of them.
Absolutely. I consulted educators as well, because the last thing you want is them to think that I think that they're doing that. But what we know is what is happening, and even across the river into Shreveport, and so it's important, that you turn the ship before you hit the iceberg, right? Once a child is exposed to something, you can't unring that bell. And so we just want, the legislature is the last line of defense. And so we needed to stand in the gap and say, this is what's not allowed in the classroom. It's not part of the agenda. The parents can't drop their children off and their kids go in the classroom and control what topics that each educator brings up. And our school boards are fearful of being sued if they, I know some school boards have passed policies that are very similar to the legislation that we passed. And some school boards are fearful to do that. And so when you have a law that they can build a policy around, it's much more helpful for them. It protects our teachers, and it definitely protects our children from unwanted, unsolicited conversations that should never, ever take place outside of the home.
Well said.
Yes, and Dodie, this bill passed in the regular session, and the governor vetoed it, if I'm not mistaken. And then in the veto override session, it missed its mark. It missed the override by one single vote. Is that right?
It missed it, I believe, by 5 votes, because we had like 7 Republicans that were not there. I received one bipartisan vote in the override. There were several Republicans that were there that could have made a difference, but they voted against the bill.
No, I think, Dodie, I think in the veto override session, we may be wrong about this, you may be right, but our understanding is that you needed 70 votes to override in the House, and you got 69.
Oh, you're right. I forgot. I don't know. I remember how many Republicans were missing, you know.
Yes. Well, not only missing, Dodie, not only missing, but you had enough Republicans there to get it. Unfortunately, you had a number of rhinos who voted against overriding the governor's veto on that legislation, which is the very reason why it is so important to return our legislature to constitutional conservatism. The reason why this great legislation was beaten in the override session was because of Republican rhinos, and that's just a fact. But it's certainly not any disparagement on the legislation. You got it passed through both houses. And unfortunately, the Republicans didn't fully show up the way they should have to make sure that it was overridden. And with bipartisan support in the original session.
Absolutely. And because protecting your children from indoctrination is not a partisan issue, nor should it ever be. And remember, most people I've talked to, my colleagues, their children go to parochial schools or private schools. Well, up here, our children all go to public schools. Vast majority do. And so, they don't have to worry about educators, or any type of indoctrination. We have to draw lines to where what's acceptable and not acceptable in the classroom in public schools, and so our concern is possibly different than their concern.
But you represent all the people, Dodie. You have a famous quote that I love to read sometimes, where you said at one point in one of the sessions, not all Republicans are equal.
Correct.
And if there's any vote that absolutely solidifies and proves that statement, it is the vote in the veto override session on 466. But it's important for the listeners to know what you tried to do there. And if I know you, it's coming
Oh,
back.
absolutely. Absolutely. And with a Jeff Landry governor, a Republican governor, it would be, I believe, as soon as it got to his desk, it would be signed into law. Because our children deserve that. They deserve all the protection that we can give them against any type of indoctrination. I mean, but our teachers, they cannot, if a student comes up and after the classroom is over, after class is over, and tries to find a teacher in the hall, said, "I'm having trouble today. Will you pray for me?" And the teacher can't initiate that prayer. You cannot do that. But yet we don't have a rule or a law that prevents them from sharing their personal lifestyle choice with that child. And that Chris and as
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Chris, as you know, in committee, there was someone that testified against the bill that was a fourth grade teacher, and she said, "I came out to my class and I had, I think she said 4 or 5 students that came out with me." Now, do
Oh
you
my
actually
gosh.
think that these children knew what they were doing or talking about? And that
Come
is the
on.
influence that they have, and it just has. We public school will be a thing of the past if we can't guarantee the parents that this will not happen when they drop them off at school.
You're so right.
You are so right, Dodie, and what you just said reminds me of something, a scripture that Danielle and I have spoken about more than once. Woe to the man who leads these little ones astray, straight from the mouth of Jesus. And that, what you just said, that little story sort of reminds me of that.
Yes. Well, and Dodie, kind of switching gears a little bit, but not totally, I share your optimism about Jeff Landry and about a conservative legislature going into next year. We're prayerful and very hopeful and doing lots of work to make sure that that's the case. You may not agree with me on this, but I think that some of these votes, like this vote on 466, I think that some of the rhinos weren't actually opposed to the legislation, but they target people to vote against, or maybe they're given marching orders by someone like the governor of people to vote against. So, I just in thinking about that, you are conservative. You have proven your conservative stripes, your constitutional stripes. You stood strong against the spending cap. You fought for the people during the lockdowns, and you did many other things as well. It's shocking that you would be drawing a Republican opponent. What could they possibly say that would be more conservative than you, that would be more pro constituent than you, that would be more pro faith than you? I have to imagine that this must be a hit job, drawn out by the rhino establishment, because you didn't bow to the whims of the governor. But you do have an opponent, and what would you say? How would you differentiate yourself from him, and how is the campaign going?
Thank you so much, because whenever people ask, say, "Dodie, what is going on up there in Bossier Parish?" How could they or I say the good old boys of the parish who only goal is to have a legislature go down there and pay whatever price they have to pay to bring every dime back home. And so, there was a time, when in the legislature, we had a legislator in office for 20 years. our street had potholes. They were not made with gold. For 30 years, the legislature did not even invest in infrastructure as a whole. But when I was elected, I gave my word that I would be the voice of the people. I would represent our morals and values and take those to Baton Rouge. I would not bring John Bell's agenda back home. And that's what I've been reprimanded, I guess, by the locals for. It started when I wouldn't vote for all the taxes in 2016, and it went on from there. Even though we have had over $205 million worth of completed road and bridge projects in my district alone, even though we have brought home $84+ million worth of capital outlay projects, it's still not enough. So it can't just be that I didn't bring enough money home, but it's what I stand for. And so there is no way, of course, my opponent can run to the right of me. He's already said he would vote it to bust a cap since it looked like it was going to pass anyway. Why not just, if you can't beat them, join them? And so that is just not what standing on fiscal conservative values is. They think we could have benefited and brought hundreds of millions of dollars home if I would have just voted to bust a cap. Well, guys, my senator voted to bust a cap. He didn't only vote to bust a cap, but he co-authored the bill. And yet, Bossier Parish did not get the money that my senator took to Webster Parish. Now, why did he not even try to protect our projects? Like my other conservative friends, their senators fought to at least, protect the projects from the governor's pen, but my senator did not. And so, he's even said that, conservatives are the problem. We just need to go along to get along. And so, if it had not been election year, I don't believe that our cuts would have been so deep. But we had 40-something million in P5 and one, and he cut the P5, which you and I both know that's words on paper. It means nothing until you get it in P1. We didn't cut the P1 funding, and so we still have $20 million here. We still have the largest one of the mega projects with Jimmy Davis Bridge. That's $1 billion economic development driver that's in the process of to being built. They're doing the design build now, and the contract's been signed. We're about to start repairing, and I don't know if Chris remembers, but through Bossier City, we have the worst section of I-20 in the state. It is an ill repair. It will mess up the alignment of your car, and that you don't even have to go fast for that to happen. And we're breaking ground on that on September the 18th. And so we have a lot of huge things going on, even in spite of voting to not spend every dime we had and to prepare in order to prepare for the $2 billion shortfall we're going to be facing in a few years. And so my opponent runs he's running to the left of me in fiscal conservative manner. He says he's going to be a Christian conservative. He says he's not going to compromise on his core beliefs, but and bring the money home too. Now we're talking about serving under John Bell Edwards. That was absolutely impossible to do, and you know it. And so, but at the same time, we did manage to bring a lot home. But I know friends, Republicans, and they were persuaded with the way that the administration could put a knife in your back, threatening you with capital outlay funds, and they voted for that penny.
To clarify, Dodie, to clarify this and make sure the record's clear on here. So it's your position as a fiscal conservative that it is possible to make sure that you secure the funding for critical infrastructure in your district and also maintain proper stewardship of our tax dollars in the legislature, i.e., not bust a spending cap. That wasn't necessary in order for you to secure what was necessary for your district.
Well, it had not been. I mean, every year since I've been in office, the governor has vetoed certain projects, but never to the degree that it was cut this year. And again, it's strictly because of the rhino and the agenda of those who do not want to see Louisiana change, who benefit from the way that it operates now, and so the good old boys from Baton Rouge, all the way into my parish, want to set an example of me. I am their target for North Louisiana. I mean, I just find that a woman, here I am representing my district, I'm your target. And the reason is they fear a legislature with people who are stand on conservative values. I am tried and true and battle tested. And I have stood and stood and stood because my district demanded that I stand. My district, and I said, we are, at least the majority of us are one voice and one heartbeat. And I just would never sell us out to fill an extra pothole. Do we despise roads? Do we want to fix them? Absolutely, but at what cost? At what cost? Raising your taxes and then to voting for the woke agenda. Really, they want these leftists and these good old boys would have me vote and support John Bell's executive order to let little boys use little girls' bathrooms. Did they want me to actually vote against a bill that protected the integrity of girls' sports? They wanted me to continue to support vaccine mandates, do everything John Bell wanted. Well, that was not what I was elected to do.
That's right. And the pattern, Dodie, the pattern is clear, and it seems to run across a number of campaigns and a number of good conservative incumbents. You stand in fidelity to the values of your constituents, the very core values of your constituents, and the old boy establishment tries to punish you for it. That's a pattern that runs across so many different campaigns, and yet you stood strong and you continue to stand strong, and hopefully your constituents are hearing it and seeing it, and that's resonating across the district, because it certainly has resonated across the legislature, and the people there definitely know who you are, and we've seen straight up close and personal the leadership that you've shown on so many of these important issues. Speaking of which, when you get back to the legislature in the next term, I'm sure that you've already thought about it. What do you see as a couple of the critically important issues that you would like to tackle and like to address that concern your voters and very likely concern citizens across Louisiana?
Well, we know that addressing crime in Louisiana is the first and foremost. If we can't address that and to put an end to the violent crime that is in Louisiana, or to push back against it, we will never be able to survive or to attract businesses to come here, to have more families move to our state. And I believe that when they passed the Justice Reinvestment Act in 2017, 2018, I believe, that's and emptied the prisons of violent criminals. That's when the crime rate in Louisiana started to rise. And now we're at an epidemic proportion in crime. And so we have got to go in there and amend those laws, or to reassess them and push back over what happened in that bill. I voted against all of it because I knew what was going to happen. And so we've got to go back and look at what the task force says we need to do to change that. I know Jeff Landry is governor. That's the first and foremost with him. And we must give the police officers the ability to police. We must stop the revolving door. And police officers are arresting people over and over again. And so that has to be addressed.
Yeah, and you're talking about the 2017 Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act, and I know, Dodie, because we had spoken then, and I know that you were not categorically opposed to every provision of the 2017 Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act. You supported some of it because some of it was very important, but a lot of it was not, and a lot of it has resulted in an increased crime, increased violence, which really could have been predicted.
Oh, absolutely. I believe that the only section part that I've supported was when the DA Association was given a directive from the federal government that when a juvenile commits a violent crime at a juvenile age, that after they serve, believe 25 years, then on an individual basis, that the justice system has to go back and reassess it, look at it, see if they continue to uphold the conviction that they had. That right there was because of directive that they had received was why we supported that.
That is exactly right, Dodie. And to drill down on that just a bit, I was involved in that during the 2017 session because I believe, as I think most conservatives in Louisiana believe, that when a juvenile commits a crime, even a very, very serious crime at the age of 14, 15, 16, 17, there should be a presumption in the law in favor of the capacity for rehabilitation and redemption after a 25-year period. And very often, these juveniles are very different people after 25 years. And the idea that, as a matter of fundamental law, every juvenile who commits a homicide at age 14, 16, 17, no matter what horrific circumstances they're being raised in, no matter what trauma they've suffered, always has to die at Angola is a fundamental miscarriage of justice. And I think it was appropriate for you to support that legislation. I think the Supreme Court decision that established that was a very important piece of legislation, and you did support that, as did a number of other conservatives. And I think it's very important that you brought that up.
Yeah, thank you so much. And speaking of juveniles, whenever they pass that, there's things in that law, so many unfortunate consequences to so much of that legislation that really didn't hold juveniles accountable. I mean, right now, if a juvenile goes in and they tear up your home, do all this structural damage, $30,000, $40,000, whatever the cost, they have 3 years to pay restitution. At the end of 3 years, if they don't, it's forgiven.
Oh my gosh. What's the incentive?
That's right. So that's something that the judges and the law enforcement have discussed. So there's a lot of unintended consequences, and again, the rise of crime is that unintended consequence of that whole gamut of bills. And so, but in order to help our juveniles, all right now we can do is send them to juvie hall or jail. We need a place for just for juveniles to go to be housed and to be able to be rehabilitated. We need to give them a hope in the future through education means, technical training, mental health counseling. We have got to be able to assist our local law enforcement agencies with that. And we could have spent so much money that's been allocated to dog rescues or band uniforms to help our sheriffs and our law enforcement to be able to address that. And I know that with a new governor going in, that everything that was passed this past session will totally be undone. That will not stand. We'll have a new budget, a new capital outlay bill, and there are a lot of wrongs that will be righted. And but putting money into our juveniles, troubled youth is a we can't get a better return on our investment than doing that. That is a must. And so I'm really passionate about that.
Well, Dodie, we are supporting you. We are so excited about your run. We
Thank
just
you.
believe in you. We know that you have been endorsed by Jeff Landry and by Congressman Mike Johnson. As a feather in your cap, you can say that you've also been endorsed by the State of Freedom podcast and LeCag.
Thank you. Thank you. And Senator Kennedy, I mean, that was huge for us. But all that matters is the endorsement of the majority of the people. And
That's
I
right.
covet your prayers. I'm praying for God's favor. My opponent and his cronies set out to change public opinion about me, and they do it by their continuing a certain narrative. And I just pray that God bring everything to the remembrance of those whom I've served, and God's will be done. He has me, and I just pray that
Absolutely.
going. It's easy to say what you're going to do under a future Republican governor, and so running for my last and final term and working under a Republican governor, it'll be so beneficial for my parish, but also for the state. We must do a
Yes,
180, and together we can make it happen.
absolutely. And Dodie, how can the people get in touch with you? Where can they learn more about you?
Well, they can go to www.dodiehorton.com, or they can send me an email at dodiehorton@gmail.com. And I'm all over, and I'm accessible. I'm just one of many. I'm a regular Joe representing regular people like me. And so I believe the majority know how to get in touch with me. But I appreciate y'all, your advocacy, your patriotism, and standing on all that God says is right, and pushing against all that we know is wrong. And your support's invaluable.
Dodie, you are just a really, really a source of real inspiration for people across the state. Let me ask you this: what is your district up there, District 9? Just so our listeners will know, that's all of Bossier Parish, right?
Well, it's a large part of Bossier Parish, but not all. But it's it is a large part. Raymond Cruz and he has the majority of the city, and he has like the town of Benton, which is in Bossier Parish. You just have to see how it's outlined. But we both share Bossier Parish, and but I do have more of the parish than, and he has more of the city. So it's just a great place to live and to raise a child, and we want to keep a conservative in this seat.
Yes, indeed, and we have a lot of respect for your colleague, Representative Raymond
He's
Cruz.
wonderful.
He's been on the show. Before we let you go, one final point here that I think it's important. A lot of our guests who we've had on the show, um, and a lot who we haven't had on the show, frankly, a lot of Republicans, they're always talking about how good things will be with a new Republican governor. And I certainly hope that that is the case. But I think it is very important for the listeners to understand and citizens to understand that Dodie Horton has not been sitting around in the legislature twiddling her thumbs, just waiting for a good conservative Republican. You brought the good bills, the hard bills, the tough bills, even with a governor who was antagonistic to our interests. You didn't just sit there and do nothing. And I think that that is very praiseworthy, the fact that she showed such courage to get those things through, knowing that because of who our governor is, there would have been a number of rhinos not only voting against you, but probably trying to undermine your legislation. So you have fought hard under difficult circumstances. And if there's anyone who's deserving to actually bring legislation where it will be blessed and ratified by a good conservative governor, it's you. We think you've earned it. And God bless you for coming on today. Godspeed for the rest of the race, 30 days out. And hopefully on October 14th, we with you will be celebrating. God bless you, Dodie.
Hey, thank you so much. God bless you both. And when you send that to me, I'll be so excited to post it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dodie.
Have a blessed day.
You too.
Bye bye.
Chris, look, there's so much to love about Dodie Horton, but I love that she's a fighter for her district and her constituents. But you know what else I really love about her? She can see the big picture implications for the state. And she's someone, and we have a track record of her who stands strong on the spending cap. She stood strong on COVID. She's not going to take votes for her district, though, that sacrifice the greater good of the state. And I think she mentioned as much. I think really there's not enough discussion about the value and the need for legislators who can do both of those things very well. Fight for your constituents, but also keep in mind we can't sacrifice the state on the altar of your district.
Yes, and Dodie has demonstrated that she has the ability to bring substantial money to her district for critical infrastructure. That is not lost on her. She has done it. She just believes that bringing infrastructure money into your district and fighting for fundamental values of her constituents, like the bills that we were talking about earlier, are not mutually exclusive. You can do both. And it's unfortunate that too many rhinos believe that it is an either or. They have to lay one to the curb in order to get the other, and that's not the case. And Dodie has demonstrated that. And she has, as you just said a minute ago, Danielle, she has the track record to prove it. One of the things that I was really struck by, I've heard from a couple of sources, that her opponent, Chris Turner, not the Turner who is the sitting state rep, another Chris Turner, has called himself a Christian conservative, but has also said that he's not going to stress or pursue any of the social issues that are so important for citizens of the state. And to me, I'm a bit suspicious about that, because it's hard for me to believe you can be a conservative Christian and yet not lend your voice to these critical social issues that afflict our state.
Yeah, 100%, Chris. And I also understood that he has emphasized the real importance of running is for him to be able to bring home the bacon. And I think we heard very clearly from Dodie. I mean, there's not really a problem with being able to get those big projects funded. I mean, as long as the governor's not doling out political retribution.
Correct. And the opponent, Turner's suggestion seems to be that he's willing to do whatever he needs to do, compromise on whatever other issues are important, critically important to his constituents, as long as it means he can bring money home to the district. Well, if we're living in a state where our children are being indoctrinated in Marxist ideology, being inculcated in ideas that cause them to have antipathy for the Constitution, to view themselves and one another strictly through the lens of race or gender, not be taught a fundamental love for the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. We're not going to have a republic for very long. Maybe we have a beautiful interstate, but we have a society that is culturally rotting. And that is what is so important to keep in mind. And I think Dodie, as you said, has fought on both fronts. And that is why I'm so pleased and happy to endorse her in her reelection. And as you said earlier, as you asked her, Danielle, it's a bit surprising, maybe not so surprising after she sort of explained the motivation for it, but it's still somewhat surprising that Bossier Parish would be propping up a quote unquote Republican to run against somebody like Dodie Horton. That raises major red flags in my mind about the nature of the opposition.
It does. And one thing she said that I really want to underscore is the fact that for 30 years before her predecessor got into office, that she was the assistant to, that the roads were in complete disrepair. And she emphasized, right, taxes were still being collected. It's not like people got a tax holiday for 30 years so that we could let the roads go into complete disrepair. No, what happens is when the swampy local governments send someone to Baton Rouge, their buddies and themselves get enriched, and the rest of the people are the ones that fall victim to complete and utter infrastructure chaos, and there are no services to back up the tax dollars that get spent. And frankly, as a citizen of Louisiana, as a resident of Louisiana, and as a resident of Terrebonne Parish, I am tired of it, Chris. I am so sick and tired of it.
I am too. And one day we'll have to sit down, Danielle, and do a tally, let's say over the last 20 years, of how much of our tax dollars has gone to fix roads in Louisiana. It would probably be a staggering amount. And if that's the case, why did Alan Seabaugh say that he was driving down the road the other day doing some campaigning and he hit a pothole and his back tail light came off
His
of
tailgate, the entire tailgate.
the entire tailgate comes off the back of his vehicle. There's something fundamentally inconsistent with spending billions and billions on roads in Louisiana, including North Louisiana, and a
With the
incumbent
highest tax rates in the country.
with the highest tax rates in the country to supposedly justify it. And yet, Representative Seabaugh had to go get his entire back part of his vehicle, fixed because of potholes on roads. It really is unbelievable. But I'm so thankful for Dodie Horton. I'm very thankful that she was able to come on and see us today. Proud to endorse her. I wanted to, Danielle, remind our listeners again of our LeCag PAC. Thank everyone for the donations to our PAC, the support you've provided. What we collect goes to help and support constitutional candidates just like Dodie Horton, who need the resources to continue to get their message out, with the ultimate goal of returning our legislature to the people. So I strongly encourage our listeners to continue to donate to LeCag, lacag.org, P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70896, and of course also the State of Freedom.
Yes, and if you'd like to support the State of Freedom financially, you can do that at freedomstate.us, or you can send us something by mail at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Chris, any last thoughts?
Danielle, I am thrilled to death because of the platform that we are building on the State of Freedom. We are day by day revolutionizing the way political advocacy is done in the state of Louisiana by providing a broad platform for constitutional conservatives to express their vision and to have thousands across the state at one time be able to listen to that vision. And in order to continue to build that infrastructure, obviously it requires money. Obviously, it requires resources to build that infrastructure, and we are continuing to do it. So from the heart, I thank all of our State of Freedom listeners for their donations, their support, their sharing and subscribing of our podcast. It helps us immeasurably to be able to keep moving forward and to continue to be the voice in Louisiana for constitutional conservatism. And each day moving forward with the help of our listeners and by the grace of Almighty God, we will preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. Thanks, Chris. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to the State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.